We have, at this moment, 135 people presenting. Good evening. Yes, good evening to all of you. Good evening. Hopefully you're getting comfortable as you can get tonight. The topic of today, the topics, has been given a special label, but it is about a year since your country, if I may say that, has been facing the devastation that started coming from the Russian side. And after that, a group of clinicians, experts, researchers that were in 2018 in Odessa felt the need to reach out with educational opportunities, supported by the European College of Neuropsychopharmacology and a group within the ECNP led by Irina Frankova, and myself and Joseph Zohar from Israel, to start hot topics. Every 2 weeks, we came to you to reach out to you, to bring you educational sessions that were supported by you, people from your end, with clinical vignettes of what was going on in your end. And over those months that we have been working together, getting this done, we've learned that war has different phases, F-A-C-E-S, but also different phases, P-H-A-S-E-S. And 12 months in a war, there's a different phase of the war. And what we wanted to do tonight with you, and my name is Eric Vermetten, and some of you have become familiar with me and Irina because we've been doing this for 26 or 7 or 8 times now, is bring you a couple of experts that have been with us. And I'll give in a minute the floor to Irina to introduce our first panelists. But I'm calling to you from Edmonton, which is in Canada. It is minus 28 degrees. That's just a small detail. I just heard that it was minus 4 in Kiev. But without further ado, I will give the floor now, or invite Irina to invite the first speaker of today, which is one of your local heroes, I should say, your colleagues, but I will give the floor to name him to Irina, and we'll continue the conversation as we unfold. Irina, please.
Thank you, Eric.
And before I present Oleg Chaban, I would like to say that right now, I see that we have 230 participants in the very beginning, and I think it's the biggest amount we've had in the beginning of any meeting. Of course, the recordings are watched a lot, but now we have quite a lot of people alive here. And I asked the participants to write in the chat where they're joining this meeting from. And I see that they are from different cities in Ukraine, and it's Kiev, Lviv, Dnipro, Kalush, Kremenchuk, Poltava, Lutsk, Vinnytsia, Ivano-Frankivsk, quite a lot from Kiev, and I see familiar faces, Zhytomyr, Kirovohrad region, and I appreciate joining us live. Indeed, it is a great opportunity to be together and to share this wisdom, follow us, and to share the experience. This event is more of the presentation of the experts, but we will also have the opportunity for your questions, and we will have a small discussion after the presentation of the speaker. So now I would like to give the floor to Professor Chaban. He is the head
Just,
of the psychology, psychotherapy, and psychosomatic medicine department.
just one
Yes.
before we go there, Irina, I want everybody to know that we have Arieh Shalev with us, we have Bob Ursano with us, and we've got Steve Hobfoll also with us. And they weren't with us initially when we joined the call. So welcome, Bob, welcome, Arieh, welcome, Steve. And we would look forward to hearing your contributions to the conversation. But yes, we will start with Professor Oleg Chaban.
Так, і
Дякую.
Олег Сазонтович, будь ласка.
Yes, Oleg, over to you. Greetings, greetings, Eric, Irina, and greetings, friends. So I have been looking at the list of participants, and I see so many familiar faces, names, greetings. I'm really sincerely happy to see you all, because indeed this year hot topics really had been an opportunity to see familiar faces and to see that life goes on, to see these moments. How are you? Yeah, I'm alive, I'm fine. And to see that life continues. You know that sometimes, like, my face is shown in different in TV shows, and I'm not narcissistic, but I respond to invitations, and sometimes I think that, well, maybe there's too much of me, but of course it's the anniversary, so I had to respond. And tomorrow I'll also be speaking at the TV, and they asked me what has changed in the minds of the Ukrainians in the year of this war. And I thought, well, yeah, we might have so many phrases about the greatness, about the power of the Ukrainians. And I've been thinking, and then I had a lesson for my students, and we talked about existential psychotherapy. And at the end of the lesson, I realized that I never gave them a chance to speak, even though I was supposed to listen to them. I just started talking about the meaning of life. When you hear that tomorrow there's a rocket strike, and today, what do you say? Well, maybe I start having uh, a different feeling towards my wife, towards my relatives. I value my life more. Or I remember my patient who really turned over my understanding of in everything. We are now doing rehabilitation. We are now rehabilitating the veterans. And this person volunteered to join the army back in 2014. And then the person became a contract officer. So when the full-scale war started, the person already was a commissioned officer, and he was a prisoner of war. He was captured, and it took 7 months, 7 months of different hardships, torture. Then he was exchanged and he got back. So he was fine physically, but of course he had the classic PTSD when we saw him. And I won't talk about the clinical symptoms, these horrible flashbacks and the intrusive memories, but I wanted to say that his attitude to us and our attitude to him was so peculiar, because this therapeutic process is modeling what is happening with us all. The first time we met, he was quite emotional and lively. He wouldn't even say that the person has been a POW for 7 months. He was so cheerful, as if he had a party yesterday. And when we asked the first question, so, like, what happened? Could you tell us in brief? At the first meeting, he said, I'm never getting back to this hell, to this horror, to all these losses, to everything I've experienced. I'm never coming back. And I understand him as a person. Yeah, these people, essentially, they paid with their health. They're traumatized. They are not combat capable. They would bring everybody else down. And we've been working for several months, and we were not discussing where should the person go next. It was his decision and not mine. We worked on PTSD, and there was so much denial. I mean, he said, "Oh, I don't want to remember this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to see this." We focused from that up until the situation when at the very end, and I didn't push him, we just worked on these traumatic memories. And a month after, at one of the sessions, he said, "You know, I decided I will get back." So I was surprised. How come? 7 months being the POW, you want to come back? And he said the key phrase, which uh, is very picturesque for me. It shows what is happening with us all. He says, "Well, I can't say no." But then I thought of all those kids, those freshly recruited kids who don't have experience. And he has been in the army since 2014. He said, "Will they survive without people like me, even if we're traumatized?" So he had this awareness that he is responsible, even though he still has horror in his mind. He has his responsibility. And it was in deep contrast to this traditional Ukrainian attitude of "my home is my fortress and I don't want to think about the politics. All the politicians, they are just thieves, they all only steal, and this has nothing to do with me." And then I see the people with huge sense of responsibility, and I understand that in this year, we all started having this new responsibility we never had before. We can use some words like identity and self-identification. When we understand who we are, that we, for example, maybe no longer switch into Russian in response to hearing Russian, even if it's your old friend. You just stay in Ukrainian and then your friend switches into Ukrainian. It's a different issue. But this year, in my head, this year, well, it passed so fast. It's not just a new idea. I think one of the Korean researchers said that during the pandemics, the subjective time in one's head was kind of suspended. It was same old picture. You're still at home, you work online, there's your TV, somebody dies outside out there, and the time has stopped. So this war instead just put everything on fast forward. You don't feel that it's been a year when you are being shelled, when there are air raid alerts, and when you already started having new habits. When you approach a checkpoint, for example, you turn off the headlights, you switch on the lights inside your car, and you show your ID. So it's a new habit. So these 365 days, they passed so fast, but they changed us all completely. Yes, we have new emotions, if this fear, anxiety, but it has a different flavor now. It has the flavor of overcoming. In the very first days, it was just paralysis. I remember when the wife says, "All the friends are leaving Kiev, let's go." And I say, "Well, these explosions, they are quite far from us. It's still not here." So the wife says, "Well, no, we have to leave." And then I show, well, okay, that highway, well, is not in our direction. We were paralyzed, and the mind just refused to work. But now we have this bravery. Other people started having it much earlier. maybe I'm just catching up. I only have it now because I was more oriented on these peaceful professions. But still, now we have this confidence, this resolve, and I'm sure that we shall persevere, we shall win. Ukraine shall be a European state, and we will be sovereign. We shall not be this little Russia. So we have this national pride that you are living in a country which can resist to this huge giant with dirty boots stepping on your soil, claiming it is his. This feeling is filling us completely, but many other things changed too. We still have a lot of unresolved anger and hatred inside, which will have repercussions. I see it in my patients. I see that they have this inner rage, that they want revenge, and they might have psychosomatic disorders later, which will kick back. But we have this existential crisis. Who are you? Existential meaning that, well, we're alone. We were born alone and we die alone. And this awareness of this mode of life, uh, it it was in a cruel way showing the value of one's life. And it is shocking, of course. It's shocking not just for me. I am only a small part in the therapeutic process, but it's shocking for all the society. And we've never had this unity and never had this trust towards the military. I think it's the first time in the history of Ukraine when through this shock we started having trust to the people who are defending us and dying. But now we have this high level of patriotism, and it's a great motivational factor. Even in the subway, people are looking at the service persons with reverence. And you can immediately see if this is a person from HQ or coming from the east, coming from active combat. I really saw people applauding the service persons in the subway.
I think I'll conclude my remarks here, and I'd love to hear from others. This was my subjective opinion. Thank you, Oleg. Oleg, thank you. I see we have loads of comments, and there was one very important comment, the adage that you used, and I like the reply from Olha Shah. She says that the saying, this has nothing to do, my house stands on the edge, I'm the first to meet the enemy. That's right, Irina. The archetype of the Ukrainian people is changing, and we modify our own sayings.
Thank you, Oleg. Irina, is it okay, before we engage in a more moderated discussion, to first allow any of the three professors, Arieh and Bob and Steve, to take the opportunity to contribute? Shall we start, if I may say so, with Arieh Shalev?
No, not much. I've been listening carefully and very informative. No comment at this end. Thank you.
May we ask Bob? Bob, would you go next to your contributions?
Just to make a comment and a question, and I appreciate seeing everyone and many faces I recognize from the wonderful work that you and Irina have been doing on holding these topics. And there was a very powerful presentation by Oleg. I hope I say it close enough, but I much appreciated his comments. Two comments caught my attention, and I just put a circle around them in my own mind. One was the applause in the subway. Very striking. I know on the world of COVID, we also noted applause as we joined together to appreciate something that seems so very powerful, and yet previous we may not have applauded. We might have had very different feelings. There's both the joining together in the applause is a powerful feeling, as well as the applause itself. And so that struck me. I was also reminded, as you spoke of POWs, my original work in trauma was with prisoners of war from Vietnam. And it led me to be thinking about what did they say that helped sustain them during time. And part of their experience, there are many different things, but part of them was clearly to be able to put their mind somewhere else, even if it was trivial for a few moments. I recall the descriptions of building a house, a brick at a time, which is how they allowed themselves to go to sleep. Literally, they would create the brick, fetch the brick, bring the brick over, and lay it down. The one has to find places in one's mind to be able to relax as a part of endurance over time. So just some thoughts. I appreciate the comments and descriptions.
Yeah, and I'm good for now. I think we can just proceed. Appreciate the comments. And
Would you want to go next with your contribution, Steve?
however order that you'd like.
Yeah,
I'm glad
go.
to.
Go,
I'm glad to. And how long?
please.
How long should I take?
Well, if you would be able to contribute about 10 minutes or so with us, and then we
Great.
would go back to Arieh and then to Bob, and then go around the table. And before going there, I would like to share how impressed I am myself to see that so many people are attending. Really, Irina, you said it also in the beginning, 200, I see 290 people is going up. And it touches my heart, and I'm getting shivers that this number is so wonderful because of the connection that is being built as we speak. So without further ado, it's really impressive that you're all hanging in this together, and the wonderful chats that you're sharing with each other is very meaningful. So just wanted to say that, and I'll give it to you, Steve.
Okay. Well, I think the first and most important thing, because after all, this is a very brief time I have, is that you all amaze me. So we don't get to amaze people that often in our life, and I know you wish you did not have this opportunity to amaze me, to amaze us. But the way that Ukraine as a country, the leadership in Ukraine, and the medical community, and you as psychologists and mental health professionals have risen to this is just it's astounding. It's historical. It's important, and I wish you didn't have to do it, but it's the nature of what's going on that you do. The second thing, and it's probably the most important thing I have to say after that, is I offered before and I offer again, if your group, whether it's a psychotherapy center, university center, would like to do a Zoom workshop with me. I've had one individual from the university do that, and we've had a couple of sessions, and I'm really very happy to continue to do that, because of course, whatever I say in 10 minutes is not going to have much impact, but we can have impact together. And so I make that offer with all sincerity. And if you think you're going to be burdening me, the opposite, I feel great contributing. It makes me feel like I can doing something that's important. The next thing I want to mention is probably most of you have seen the movie Schindler's List. And in this movie, Spielberg engineers a scene in which a Jewish family that had been a wealthy family is brought into a room of an apartment. It may have even been in their old house, I don't know. So let's say, just say a very wealthy family that they had a 10 or 12 room apartment. And they're brought in by the Nazis into a room, and the husband tries to comfort his wife saying, see, it's not so bad. Now they've gone from 10 or 12 rooms and servants and wealth to one room. He says it's not so bad. And just then Spielberg, the brilliant director, brings 3 more families into the room. That's been your experience. And the term that we coined for this is called recalibrating. We really know nothing about recalibrating. It's hardly studied, but it's the process by which that on one hand, you have 10 rooms and you think that a terrible day would be to move into an 8-room apartment with servants, and then you find yourself in a 1-room apartment in captivity, and then in the next moment, 3 more families are in the room. Yet we recalibrate to this, and although many do experience severe psychological impact, the amount of resilience that we see in these conditions is phenomenal. And even not doing well, in quotes, in these situations, you might still be doing a lot better than you ever thought possible or that we might predict. And so this experience of recalibrating, perhaps this is a concept for you to think about, and how you and the people you're working with are constantly having to recalibrate as to what the threshold is, what can you take, what, it's kind of like, how long can you stay underwater? And you think it was 10 seconds and now you find it's 3 minutes. So that recalibrating is an important process. And it's important to talk to people about in treatment, because they think, oh, I'm doing terrible. Well, yeah, I don't think it's not that you are having a hard time, but look at what you've done, because you started here and then you were here and now you're here, and yet you're still coming in and you're still talking and you're still supporting your family. I think that also brings up another point is, psychology is psychiatry are pathology based. We studied pathologies. And I remember I was seeing an inner city woman, and she certainly had her difficulties. She had been terribly abused. She had been sexually abused. She had been turned over to foster families that abused her. And all of my students wanted to talk about that abuse history. And they were complaining that she came in late for sessions. The student that was seeing her, the postdoc actually, that was seeing her. I said, well, why is she coming in late? Well, she's got her kids in dance lessons and in soccer and tutoring. I said, well, let's talk about that. I mean, that's unbelievable. This woman who herself has no education knows to get her kids in tutoring for school, and she's got them involved in ballet lessons and in soccer, football, as the world calls it. And you want to talk about her psychopathology? I'd like to see you do this. And probably none of us in this room could accomplish what she's accomplishing. So this is, again, an idea for treatment of talking about, okay, I understand how bad you're doing, and we will talk about that. But look at all that you're doing. You're homeschooling your kids. You're thinking of activities for them. You're taking care and getting over to your parents' house and helping them. So focusing on all of the things that they are doing, and that doesn't mean that you don't also talk about the difficulties they're having, but keeping both in balanced context. So on this laundry list thing that I'm going to go through, As mental health professionals, we're famous for being terrible in sharing and seeking help ourselves. That's important for you to be doing. I tend to be anti-medication, but pro-medication when it's needed. And if you need medication to help with coping, well, consider it. Don't be afraid of it. It's important to limit medication, but not to limit it below where it's needed. This can be important. And for those of you who are psychologists and social workers, etc., often we have an anti-medication philosophy, but it has its place, and it has its place in your lives. So, psychotherapy has its place in your lives. Yet, we tend not to use it. At a year in, you may need some sessions that could could help you. Obvious to talk about, but less obvious how you do it is self-care. One issue of self-care is watching alcohol consumption. Ukraine is a drinking country. There are chronic problems of alcoholism in Ukraine. Alcohol is a problem, and watch it in your own lives, and seek help for it if it's becoming a problem. And the way to think about that is to actually look at what the definitions of alcohol or substance abuse are, because the threshold's lower than you think, and that's important in its own right, but then also gets us into sleep hygiene, which is critical, because alcohol, one of the most insidious effects of alcohol, even at fairly low levels, is how it interferes with sleep. And with all the stress you're under, sleep may not be the greatest thing anyway, so it becomes even more critical during that time. So I talked about sharing and psychotherapy. I also want to underscore not sharing. I want to advocate for practiced denial. And what I mean by that is, it is not good to be going over all the troubles and all the difficulties that you are having all the time. Even with grief after a period of, say, a month, it is important to say, I am going to spend time not thinking about that. I'm going to make an appointment for my grief, for my difficult time, for my worries. And the threshold that I use is, if you're going over it again and again, and you're not adding anything new, then that's obsessing. The work of worry pushes us to think through things. But if you've thought through and it's not new, then it's time to start suppressing it. Not totally, but what you do is you make an appointment with yourself. I will, if it's necessary, once a day for a half hour. If you've gotten to maybe a better point, on Thursday and Tuesday, I'm going to spend an hour really thinking about difficulties I'm having, and thinking about my sadness and what I'm sad about and my grief. But I'm actually going to practice not going there during other times. Now, added to that, I talk about what are working distractors. Well, friends and conversation can be distractor. Exercise critical. If you're in shape enough, what they call HIIT exercise, high intensity, getting your pulse up, and you can do that through running, but you can do that at home if it's unsafe to run outside. With you can call up a Zumba dance video, and I've done some dance videos that I can only last 15 minutes on. There are levels of intensity and you're dancing, and dancing is important. And if you can get your family to do it and your kids to Zumba with you, it's great to do. It's doing a couple things. Not only are you dancing, but getting your aerobic level up unto the point where blood is no longer very available to the brain. Runners call it getting in the zone, and giving you that hour time out from real difficulties that are there. Yoga, if that's an inclination of yours. Again, getting that pulse up thing and exercise, and I think that might be also important. I don't know, it depends on your region, how shut in you've been. And I don't imagine that, I'm sure there's a lot of regions where it's just not safe to go out and jog. So you've got to figure out things that are going to do this within your home. And since by definition here, you can get online, there's endless things available to do this online. Music, books on tape. Again, things that Csikszentmihalyi used to talk about getting in flow. If you play a musical instrument, practicing it. So, you know, all things that are important. And the last one I want to mention is regularizing, which often when we're in the midst of tragedy, we feel guilty about regularizing, meaning living our lives. This means having sex with your partner. It means, again, doing yoga because you did it in the past and now getting back to it. Dancing, inviting friends over for dinner. And if it's unsafe to be going for dinner, having a Zoom dinner parties. Getting back and doing life, because we can put life on hold for a week, we can put life on hold for a month, you can't put life on hold for a year. And often what's holding us back there is a sense of guilt. How can I be enjoying these moments when I have dead friends, when I have dead family members, when I have others that are risking their lives now? That is, and the last thing I'll say about this is, that is what they are fighting and sacrificing for, so they can live normal lives, so you can live your life. So by living your life and doing things, not through, feeling guilty, but realizing that is what they want of you. So I'll end with that in my brief thing. Again, contact me. Let's do some workshops. You will not be burdening you. I'll work with groups of 10, 50, 300, however you'd like to do it.
Thanks, Steve, for these words of recalibration. I think it all umbrellas, if I listen into you carefully, under all recalibration. That was sort of the chapter of your contribution, with many opportunities to find relief or sustainability in all the things that you walked us through briefly. Thanks for sharing that. And I'm looking at the clock, and we have two other co-presenters that are with us. Irina, if it's okay to invite either Arieh or Bob to go next and contribute with their thoughts.
Обов'язково.
Of course. I also encourage the colleagues to write the questions in the chat. And after we hear from all the presenters, we will be able to respond to the questions in a discussion. So now I give the floor to Professor Shalev.
Well, thank you, Irina. And as always, I'm humbled by the privilege to participate in these panels, in these meetings, and contribute to what I see as a century-defining war in Ukraine, and to an extent, a materialization of what we've always been afraid of, is a war of evil against the goods. And indeed, when you think about Western countries, we have not experienced a total war in our territories. And as such, a lot of the knowledge we have on PTSD and on surviving warfare comes from wars fought elsewhere, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, you name it. And this is a rather new template to start considering, which is one point. The other point is that we were really fascinated by the PTSD concept, by the post-trauma concept. And we have not accumulated, we are just accumulating, thanks to the work and to the experience of people in Ukraine, and partially after the COVID, we are just accumulating more knowledge about prolonged traumatic situations and how people who are not heroes or not war fighters or how people survive as a national community, as a city, as a trauma that is lingering. And so in my previous contribution to this forum, I tried to focus on issues that have mainly to do with survival. And I will not be able to add much more to what Steve has just said. It's always a pleasure to speak after Steve Hobfoll because he says everything that I have in mind. But so this is the kind of work, and the focus was on adjustment to a warfare condition, and it's been translated to Ukrainian, and I'm discussing the communalities of war stress and others. And basically, the basic concept was really adjusted, and it was really influenced by the first month of the war, where there was so much of surprise that people really need to adjust. It was entirely new for a European city to be shelled. It's not anymore, and this is very true. And the one advice that I was able to formulate is that if you need to check whether you're okay or whether your community is coping okay, then you look at these 4 parameters. Can the community or me, can I continue to perform my task? Am I in at least partial mastery of my emotion? Am I dominated by emotions? Can I still maintain a positive view of myself? I mean, at a community level, it would mean, are we fighting within the community? We don't have a positive perception of who we are and what we are fighting for. Are we fragmented already, or as a person, am I fragmented? And the last is the ability to maintain the capacity to feel the warmth of others and to be a emotionally active member of the society. So this is really where I was at the time. And at this point, preparing for this talk, I started to think about people who have been seriously traumatized by the war, and whether I should in addition to discussing how you adjust and survive and take a break, as Steve said, and practice yoga, what about those who are already affected or are likely to be affected and who do not sleep, who haven't slept for a year, for a few weeks or a year, who are terrified, who cannot stop thinking about it as would be desirable? What do we do with these people or people who have been severely injured? And I've been thinking about some generic parameters of PTSD that are not the ones that the DSM tells you about, but are very different, very relevant, I think, for people who experience traumatic stress conditions when the war is still going on. So one pervasive negative force on PTSD patients is loneliness. I've said it in other places. The first thing that a good clinician or a good manager should know is whether that particular patient is disconnected from the rest of society. Loneliness for PTSD is a killer. PTSD patients commit suicide when they're lonely. So one effort is never to leave a patient alone. I've been teaching nurses in the orthopedic or surgery department. Don't stop listening to someone who tells you about the trauma 500 times on the same day in exactly the same words, just because they repeat themselves, because what they need is your contact. So never first worry about that the people who are now symptomatic and have PTSD are not left alone, although it's not always very attractive to be with them. The second concept that is generic throughout the PTSD, but we never talk about it, is the meaningfulness of the traumatic experience. We've shown in previous studies and others is that people whose trauma or children whose parents died in a way that was somehow meaningfulness, like war hero against road traffic accident, the meaningfulness of having been the experience is extremely important in what you feel about yourself and in the kind of despair or a self-critique that you have. And I think that as long as the public in Ukraine keeps the war fair as a meaningfulness business of the entire community, then people who fought combat and people have been through a meaningful traumatic experience, which is completely different from a traumatic experience that you attribute to someone cheating on you or sending you to a combat that you never wanted to participate in. So, and that the entire is meaningful on a personal level, but also on the community level. So you have that loneliness and meaningfulness, and with the meaningfulness comes the social solidarity. I think it's better than SSRI for a PTSD patient. The social solidarity, the social understanding of what you went through, and the participation in your suffering, in your symptoms. So the social solidarity, this is what keeps groups together. This is what keeps PTSD patients together within their group. The other thing that helps is, unfortunately, the lack of choice. If you have to fight or lose everything, then fighting is your choice. You don't have other choices. We don't remember that in the West, that at times we didn't have choices. There were no choices. And to an extent, having no other good choices is, I regret to say, and I hope that this will change very soon. And please, for me, win the war as soon as you can. But for the time being, there is no other choice. And that is extremely powerful thing. I think Bob Ursano may expand on other measures like grief rituals, and just help people however they are. Yes, they have symptoms, but they are human beings that need contact, human contact, solidarity, meaningfulness and experience, of the meaning of experience. And in terms of what my last point, I was going to say that denial is very useful under stress. If you want to function as a combatant and you have to charge forward, you need to deny death. Otherwise, you can't function. So, but Steve said it so elegantly that I won't repeat it. Yes, a level of denial is salutary. Just one last point. I think that the idea that do not treat people who have difficulties with benzodiazepines, who are both addictives and subject to abuse, I would say they're as irrational and dangerous as alcohol. The entire literature shows that when people take those medications to gain a night's sleep, then the likelihood of their remaining with PTSD over the years is much higher. Try to do something else. Maybe what Steve said, like a dancing or something like that, or whatever. So even when you move from survival type of remarks to the PTSD type of remarks, what remains sure is that in this kind of war, we are not really individuals. We are individuals embedded in a community, embedded in groups, embedded in families, and a lot of help and a lot of assistance comes from assisting the community to remain cohesive and to remain to be capable of helping individuals who are actually not feeling well and not doing well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arieh, for those wise words on loneliness, meaningfulness, solidarity, lack of choice, denial, and community. Just summarizing a few items, they're very wise and thoughtful comments that we need to reflect on. I know that Irina wants to touch on some of the things you said before we reach out to Bob. But Irina, you wanted to comment, please?
Так, я хотіла підтвердити
Yes, I wanted to reaffirm Professor's words about the importance of working with loneliness, because unfortunately, the data we received analyzing the users of our chatbot called a friend, друг, it now has 80,000 people. So on day 2 of the war, when Professor Shalev and Professor Ursano and Arieh and Professor Chaban, we all were engaged and they helped with the wisdom or revising our recommendations. And we analyzed these first 50,000 users in the first 3 months. We've seen that it was 70% loneliness that people have noted. And I think it's really tightly related with the traumatic experience we've encountered. On the one hand, for example, I certainly didn't want to overburden my relatives with the heavy experience I've had. And on the other hand, we were losing this connection. It was difficult to share this experience with those who didn't have similar experience because we had this bias that, well, they won't understand us. So it will be interesting to see now if this indicator changes, if there is a trend. I think, and this was my small comment, and now I'm looking forward to the presentation by Professor Ursano.
Thank you, Irina. With those empirical data that the chatbot has shown and how important that is to feel that cohesiveness and connection, and the data that show that loneliness can be a very, I would say, debilitating but important factor to recognize. Thanks again, Arieh, for those wise comments. Really, really appreciate it. And Bob, may
My pleasure.
we invite you to comment on your behalf.
Thank you, Eric and Irina. And as have others have said, I am so much in admiration of you all and all that are here attending in terms of the work that you all are doing under terrible circumstances, and for which we all wish you from our heart our strength to give to you. As Eric said, and I can repeat, whenever being on a panel with Eric and Stevan, it's kind of, yep, they said it. They've already said it. So in some ways, what I will say will echo what's already been said. I'll pick up a few points that they mentioned, and then I'll bring up at least a couple of words that haven't been mentioned. But since we were just talking about the question of loneliness, which absolutely I agree. A huge component of our work as psychotherapists is to relieve loneliness, if only for a moment, with a patient. A huge part of being part of a community is to relieve the sense of loneliness in a very different way, such as applauding together in the subway. It's a very different experience to have loneliness removed at the community level than at the individual level, and both are important. So how does one do both? As a part of our work in psychotherapy and in our own interpersonal relationships, loneliness can be kept if in fact someone shares with you something that is very painful, and your response is, you don't have to feel that way. You know, things are really better. That may not relieve the sense of loneliness. It may in fact feel the patient or the friend or the neighbor may in fact feel more distant, more pushed away. In contrast to the statement of, it feels very hard, doesn't it? It does whenever that comes up. So what's the difference? There was actually a very nice article by David Brooks on this topic and in terms of death. The difference is the use of empathy versus the use of knowledge. In the use of knowledge, we say, no, things will get better. In fact, have you da-da-da-da? Very important intervention, may not relieve loneliness. Empathy, in fact, going to where the person is, which we do in our clinical work all the time, and we do in our close relationships, is a way to relieve a sense of, I am alone with this. The one is not alone, it is then shared. So why is that hard? It's hard when we think of it in clinical work when you do a lot of it. It's hard when you think of it in a war because it's ongoing. And empathy has a cost to the person who's providing it as well. We will at times shut down our empathy because it's too much. It's too hard to go where the person is feeling their pain. And at times we need a break to be able to restore our ability to join them, and in that way relieve their loneliness, and in some ways relieve ours. So loneliness and how to manage it as a person. So then let me move to the other part about applauding in the subway, which I love. I absolutely love that experience. It's the difference between watching your football game at home on television versus being in the stadium. It is a very different sense of being with. There is a concept which I think both Arieh and Steve were alluding to called collective efficacy, which is the sense of a shared strong community. It's different from a shared friendship. It is the sense that my community itself is strong. And that is what comes from applauding together. Very different than talking together. Both important, but quite different. So those lead me to another piece, which I think is very much related, which is this question of hope. I like the concept a lot. I don't think we understand it very much. it is clearly critical to our ability to sustain any activity over time, whether that's to sustain going to school, taking care of our children, getting up in the morning in the middle of a war. All of those require a sense of hope. We work hard in clinical work to restore hope for our patients. We at times hold hope for them when they lose it themselves, and we remind them of what they said the day before, or what they said a year ago, or what their goal is. So how do we sustain hope? What amazes me is that in Ukraine, hope is sustained. It's sustained in many ways by what Oleg said around whether that's by the ability to take responsibility, or in many ways, as Eric also rephrased Oleg's comments on finding meaning, responsibility, future, direction, by finding honor in one's soldiers. But hope is also external. I saw recently in Arena, Eric, feel free to correct me, but I saw recently that in Poland, there is an important sharing of a particular candy, which is called Everything Will Be Ukraine. However you say that in Ukrainian, it's some particular candy that is Ukrainian. Similarly, there is the, apparently not known to me, the Kiev cake, and that the Kiev cake is also an expression of we are together. So that hope appears both in our interpersonal, but also in our collective wisdom and our collective sharing. And those symbols of hope are as important as our individual sharings of hope. So then my last area to comment on, which is really to echo Eric and Stevan with just a different word, and Oleg actually, that our goal as therapists and our goals in getting through terribly traumatic experiences, as Eric said, the prolonged traumatic situations, good phrase, is actually the ability to forget. Now, what do I mean forget? Forget doesn't mean wipe it out of your memory banks, but it does mean actually being able to let it go. Our moments of being able to forget provide us senses of relief. And has been mentioned both by Arieh and Stevan, it can also make us feel guilty. That in fact, in that moment when my 3-year-old ran across the room and gave me a hug, I smiled, I felt their hug, I felt my hug on them, I gave them a kiss, and for 1 minute, I totally forgot about the war. That sense of forgetting is a valuable way of sustaining ourselves and bringing energy back. The ability to forget, some have described it as take the book, you don't lose the book, but you put it on the shelf. You don't have to have it open all the time. The ability to forget is something we teach our patients, particularly trauma patients. There's remembering the events, but the ability to let them go. So sustaining the ability to forget, to have moments of pleasure, joy, and gee, it felt for a moment like old times. And to recognize that as a valuable part of sustaining over time, to maintaining our hope and to feeling a collective joining together that can be as having dinner together with friends and realizing that one's laughing, or can be outside together and in fact sharing a meal with a larger group. The idea that forgetting, being able to set aside the traumas that we're presently enduring, is a part of being able to endure going forward. I'll stop there, Eric and Irina. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob, so much for these also wise words, very wise words, and very impactful and meaningful, timely words at this moment. And Irina, I don't know how that is for you, but listening to Oleg and Steve and Arieh and Bob, I'm delighted with this session that we have thus far. Now, I know that we have a couple of minutes, maybe 10 minutes left, and I just wanted to reflect with you. Would it be okay now if we ask Oleg and Steve and Arieh to reflect or comment, maybe for a minute or so, or maybe 2 minutes, because we do want to close at the quarter past the hour, but we do want to like also give the opportunity, maybe last word for Oleg, but give Steve the opportunity first to reflect on what he's heard thus far. He may have the opportunity to add a few words. Would it be okay, Steve, to just comment or reflect for a minute? Oh, you need to unmute first, Steve.
Yes, I was saying that I would love to hear some questions from the group and shared thoughts, but I think one of the important themes that run across what Bob and Arieh said, and I said, is this idea of which seems so impossible of forgetting or denial, of enjoying life. And again, I think the pivot for that is remembering that that is what those who sacrifice for us in Israel, we say the silver salver that was served up through the sacrifice of those that have fallen. And because they wanted us to remember them, certainly, but they've done this so that we can live our lives. And that is the thing that you have to go to allow yourself often to enjoy, to celebrate, to savor, and not be consumed by guilt over doing that. And again, and then you have to get back to the work that you have to do. So I think that was a point running through that I think was most important of what we said at a year and the clock's still running.
Thank you, Steve. Arieh, may I invite you, or maybe invite you to add a thought or a reflection?
Well, I think the center of all this is that the war still goes on, and that the war has to be won, and that individuals are important, but they reflect pretty much their community. So the emphasis now is probably not on me, on an individual, but, and this I learned from Steve, individual is embedded in a family, which is embedded in a community, which is embedded in, you name it, city, town. I pray that this cohesion that we've seen until now, and which, as I said, is relevant to everyone, including those with traumatic stress disorders, will continue, because ultimately the one who wins is the one who stays standing. And I hope that in a year time we will be after all this nightmare and be able to be really post-war, not within a war.
Thanks, Arieh. Thanks, Arieh. And Bob, the Kiev cake, I saw smiles on the faces of some of the participants when you mentioned the Kiev cake. Have you tried one yourself?
I have not. I look forward to it.
Okay. Maybe a last reflection, then we'll ask Oleg to, with Irina, to reflect and to kind of synthesize, if we may ever go at the synthesis of this. But I'd like to hear Oleg, who started out with his observations from within, right? So we are, as a community, an outsider here looking at the news that we hear, and our professionalism allows us to make these observations. But I'd like to invite Oleg as the last person to reflect. But maybe some additional thoughts before we go there, Bob?
Eric, the other thing I hear across all of us is this issue of recognizing both our individual relationships and our community relationships, and how they mirror each other, but they're also different. And sustaining both is important to our endurance going forward, our ability to feel hope, and our resilience in the face of all that's going on. And my hearts go out to all that are here, and I look forward to other ways in which I can be of help.
Thanks. Thanks, Bob. And Irina, maybe you would like to reflect and invite Oleg and spend a few minutes on synthesizing, contributing, and a kind of a thing that came to my mind, and then I'll leave it to you, is like, okay, so what would the 23rd February 2024 look like, and kind of an assignment or so? Can we commit to meeting together in a year's time? Where would we be if we were going to live enough and then meet each other and reflect on another year, the second year of what? Right? So, okay, that's the thought that came to my mind, just and many others as well. But no, okay, without further ado, Irina and Oleg, your thoughts, please.
Ну, мабуть, я почну. Взагалі,
I
якщо
think
хочете
I'll start. So, if you would like to taste the freshest Kiev cake, you need to come to Kiev.
це дуже проста, конкретна дія.
It's a simple, concrete action. But believe me, we feel that you are here. The meetings we've been having for a year is you being in Kiev and us being in Europe. I was writing a comment on Arieh Shalev. You might have never read it, a review. It was a journal translated into Ukrainian. I came under harsh criticize of Irina. She said what I wrote was not a review, but a romantic article. My review indeed was very romantic. And there was just one phrase that turned me into a romantic. Arieh said, as soon as person gets out of hell, the person starts celebrating life. The person looks around, says, I'm alive, life goes on. I think this is at the heart of what we're talking about today, celebrating life. All the advice, such as exercise or jogging or yoga, the neurosynthesis happens when there is a physical exercise that makes you happy. When you're listening to music because it brings joy, or when you go for a run, and you do a tiny bit of running, but you enjoy it, new neurons are created, neurogenesis happens. I teach my students, we are fighting for the sake of the peace. We demonstrate this peace by drinking coffee, and the bright side, the light, the logical always wins for the sake of something that these sacrifices are made. In my head, I have lots of existential thoughts in my head because of the patients I work with. I would like to express my gratitude, and I call on all our psychologists, psychiatrists, mental health professionals. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for avoiding secondary traumatization. Thank you for making PTSD a symbol of a post-traumatic growth, not grief. And together, we will emerge out of this stronger. In 1 year's time, we will taste together Kiev cake in the times of peace. I'm certain of it. Thank you, Professor Chaban. Thank you, Oleg. I second all these words. I see an enormous amount of thanks put in the chat. I shared all possible links for helpful resources that we have accumulated over this year.
And now Irina's internet froze. Oh, Irina, come back, please.
Так,
There-
вибачте, в мене
Yeah.
пропав трохи інтернет.
Yes, sorry, I got disconnected. So my point was, is that last time when Steven presented together with Professor Chaban, Steven said something that you need to think of your experience. This is scale up your experience. This is my observation. And this spurred Oleg Chaban to record many YouTube videos with tiny therapeutic stories. I put the link to this YouTube channel in the chat. It's gaining traction already, but I thank you. It was a major support, and it paves the way for many successes.
Реклама, Chaban, YouTube.
Promoting YouTube's Chaban's YouTube channel. Thank you.
Принаймні це роблю щиро.
Well, at least I'm being candid as I do it.
So thank you for the applause actually that we give each other by joining in this session and being present with us and seeing your faces and your smiles and nodding and the non-verbal. We can't hear all your voices, but we can see you and we hear the chat. And this is just a group effort. And really, I'm way distance, as others says, we're connected. And we will keep doing this. I mean, there's a day after tomorrow, and there's another hot topics in a month's time that we are willing to prepare for you because it's necessary. And thank you for all the services that you provide to people in need. And great that Oleg said that it needs to be acknowledged. We acknowledge each other, and by doing that, so we empower each other. And with the wise words that we've heard thus far tonight, I hope that they provide some coherence and the recalibration and the loneliness and all these words that matter so much for sustainability of lives that are meaningful. And the several plates, beautiful how you said that, Steve, also. And we will continue to reach out to you in whatever medium we have with YouTube and others. This is recorded, and I hope that many, many people have the privilege and the opportunity to revisit this, because there's so many things, wise things that have been said that I think that are worthy to be listened to again and to be brought to a wider community. Is beautifully that's translated in English and Ukrainian, so wonderful. And